let's switch focus for the rest of the lecture and start talking about innovation. In my mind, innovation is one of the last things we talk about in a consumer behavior class, but innovation is so important that it should absolutely be integrated into a consumer behavior class. So let's get started. So, we typically define innovation as an offering that is new to the marketplace, a product, a service, or an idea consumers within a market segment perceive as new and that has an effect on existing consumption patterns. This is a pretty broad definition. And there are some really interesting things that are true about this definition, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So, what I was kind of trying to hint at in the last slide is that innovation is a new value, and invention is a new product. So, if we look on the side of this slide, the right-hand slide for me, bacon strips. So, these are adhesive bandages, so band-aids basically. You could call this well, you'd have to call it an innovation, right? So an invention would basically be the band-aids, right? Regular band-aids that you know. Innovation would be these bacon strips because they provide some kind of new value to people who apparently want their arms or legs or wherever they're putting these to look like bacon. I don't know these people, but it's interesting. Or this directly below it, this pepper grinder that looks like a baseball bat. Again, this is not necessarily an invention, right? It's not really a new product. We have pepper grinders, we have baseball bats. We don't have the two together, so this would be an innovation. I'll give you a third example. I was reading Reddit, and they had an advertisement for something called Inkbox. Inkbox is a company that creates just temporary tattoos, but these tattoos should last 2 to 3 weeks, right? This is really interesting to me, right? So I would never, ever, ever get a tattoo. There's nothing that I want to be permanently on my skin, but the idea of having a tattoo for 3 weeks is kind of enticing, and so I decided to buy myself one. The tattoo itself and the temporary tattoo in general is not a new product, but it is a new value that they're bringing to the market, right? Actually, let me go back. I actually think it is a new product as well because they're using some specific new technology. It's supposed to be really natural. I don't know, but again, this is a new value that they're bringing to the marketplace. I would argue probably a better value than bacon strips or king pepper, but I'll leave that debate up to you. So now we'll talk about characteristics of innovation. So we usually classify innovation based on the degree of novelty of the product being or service that is kind of being produced. So one type of innovation is what they call continuous innovation. In this instance, you modify an existing product to set it apart. I'm going to use Coke and the University of Phoenix for this example. Again, you're modifying something as opposed to creating a totally new product. So Coke has come out with several versions of itself, Diet Coke, Coke Zero, Coke Life. Usually there's very little change in technology. It has the least disruptive influence on established usage patterns. So people who already drink diet soda will probably drink Diet Coke and will probably drink Coke Zero or Coke Life, or at least try them. You don't get a huge group of new consumers that are going after these products usually. One thing about continuous innovation is that it should be above the perceptual threshold of the customer, right? So we talked about just noticeable difference a few classes ago. And for continuous innovation, this is true. People should be able to notice a difference between it and other options, right? It should be able to grab the consumer's attention at least somewhat. The other example I used is the University of Phoenix. So some schools were already offering online classes. The University of Phoenix came in and started offering a complete degree online. One could argue very I think convincingly, that it is an example of continuous innovation. They modified a product, an existing kind of platform for education. So another type of innovation is dynamically continuous innovation. So under this type of innovation, a new product or pronounced modification to an existing product brings about pronounced effects on consumption practices. So I'm going to give you two examples. The first, a smartwatch, right? So the smartwatch was created. It has advanced so much that you can take a call from your smartwatch, you can listen to music on your smartwatch, you can get health information on your smartwatch, and because it was created, a lot of people who weren't really wearing watches are now wearing watches, right? So you see this pronounced effect on consumption practices. And again, I would argue that a smartwatch isn't really a new product. I think it's a pronounced modification to an existing product. Now, whether that existing product is traditional watches or whether that product is something like a Fitbit, which is, I don't know what you would even call a Fitbit, one could argue that really a smartwatch is just a combination of those plus kind of cell phone technology. There usually are some technical advances when we think of new products or modifications to existing products for continuous and dynamically continuous innovation. Another example is Uber, right? So if we think about what Uber does, it picks you up, but it really just takes you where you want to go. Taxis did that, right? The argument that Uber, or the kind of advantage of Uber, is that it can find you where you are and direct a car exactly to where you are, whether it's a bar, whether it's your house, whatever. So it's really the technology that has really kind of pushed or propelled Uber more so, I would argue, than the service. Um, and you find that a lot in kind of these advances when we think about iPod. So there were competitors on the market that weren't very different than the iPod itself, right? So the iPod wasn't dramatically new. What really was new is iTunes, right? And Apple has created an entire ecosystem now. So, and really one could argue quite convincingly that most of Apple's products aren't necessarily kind of new products. Usually they're pronounced modifications to existing products, which is really interesting, right? Really interesting to think that Apple is not really coming up with new products. What they're doing is letting new products come on the market, and then they're spending $1 million a day on R&D to kind of better those products. And people flock to that, right? One, because of the ecosystem, and two, because some of their products are better. One thing to remember about dynamically continuous innovation is that it alters consumer buying and usage patterns. This is a big deal. So when we think about Coke, from the previous slide, when Coke Zero came out, you didn't see this huge rush for people buying Coke Zero. But when Uber or the iPod or smartwatches came out, you do see people rush to buy these products, and people who will rush to buy them and then buy the newer version, so on and so forth. So discontinuous innovation is when a new product is presented that changes the way we live. It's that dramatic. It changes the way we live. So we could think about the internet, which has changed the way we live. It's changed the way we converse with each other, the topics we talk about, the information that we know. One could make a very convincing argument that the same is true of social media. It's changed our connections with consumers and other people. We probably have more friends than we've ever had before, but they're shallow friends as opposed to deep connections. So usually it's the introduction of a pioneering product. I put the Model T on here. Again, something that changes the way we live. When Ford introduced the Model T, really changed the way people live. Usually it involves a major technological advance. Customers must learn new behavior patterns. So when the internet was created, people had to learn how to use the internet. And now, some people might use it a little bit too well. It may be difficult to market initially, right? And this is why we're talking about innovation, because sometimes marketing new products is difficult. And then the innovation itself is rare, right? So as far as I know, no one has topped the internet quite yet. And the internet, I think I've been told, is something like still in its infancy. So we don't know kind of how advanced it will end up being. So for this slide, I'd like you to think of other examples. Like, can you think of examples of continuous innovation, of dynamically continuous innovation, of discontinuous innovation? I think doing so and kind of coming up with your own examples, of course, always helps for the test. So when we think about innovations, we have to think about the benefits that are offered from innovations. Sometimes we have functional innovations, right? Where the functional performance benefits over existing innovation. So you think about hybrid cars, right? Assuming that there's a functional benefit to hybrid cars. Although I think there could be some pushback there. We've seen Chevy just announce that they're getting rid of the Volt and the Bolt because consumers weren't buying them as much as they previously assumed. It could be that this is, again, with this discontinuous innovation, it's a little tougher to sell to the average consumer. You might have aesthetic or hedonic innovations, innovations that appeal to aesthetics, pleasure seeking, or sensory needs. So mascara might be this. It applies to aesthetics. If you wear mascara, you know they're constantly coming out with new versions of it. You could also think of something like Tough Mudder, which is a race that's actually kind of tough. It's like an obstacle course. I don't know if anyone here has participated in Tough Mudder, but it's kind of cool. Another example is Burning Man, which is represented by the picture on the slide. These are things that appeal to pleasure seekers. I don't know how long Burning Man or Tough Mudder has existed, but you see more people talk about it, more people participate, so on and so forth. And these would be, hedonic innovations. Another benefit would be a symbolic innovation. So products, services, attributes, or ideas that have new social meaning. So I would make a really strong argument that beards have come back as a symbolic innovation, right? Where consumers are wearing beards to appear hipsterish or because they're popular now, right? So for a long time, people didn't really wear beards. Men didn't really wear beards. Because they were associated with hippies and things like this. And now beards are the new thing. One could also make the case that natural hair for people of color has made a resurgence, and similarly tattoos. It used to be that when people had a tattoo, you make these assumptions about them. I spent a year in Salt Lake City. I was probably one of the few people living in Salt Lake City proper that did not have a tattoo, if not many, many, many tattoos. So there's that. You can't really talk about innovation without talking about co-creation. So traditionally, companies have controlled the innovation process. So they come up with innovations, or someone comes up with an innovation and starts a company. Now we have companies that are actually pursuing innovation via co-creation, right? Where they're trying to collaborate between both, or trying to create situations where there's collaboration between producers and users, right? So ultimately, they're trying to generate value for customers, and we see that. So think about Lay's. So Lay's every year now has a contest where people can send in different ideas for flavors. They've had sriracha, they've had cheesy garlic bread, chicken and waffles, mango salsa, bacon mac and cheese. And cappuccino. Don't get me started. Anyway, I unfortunately have never tasted any of these chips or any of the Lay's chips. I should do this at one point in my life. I actually should submit a flavor. I don't know why I haven't, because I think you can win $1 million. But think about why Lay's is doing this. What are the benefits of co-creation? Why should companies seek out information or ideas from consumers? Time's up. No, I'm kidding. Now that you've thought about it, though, there are a lot of benefits to co-creation. I'll just talk about three. One, consumers usually enjoy getting involved in the experience, right? They see some satisfaction in terms of seeing their ideas transformed into innovative products. So one company that has just done a fabulous job with this is Lego, right? So Lego has made a huge resurgence. It used to be that the only people who really played with Legos were, like, my 7-year-old nephew and my 5-year-old niece. Now you see them making Legos that are depictions of different cities. You see them making Legos that are depictions of different movies and games, and you see people who are Lego collectors, right? Another benefit may be that innovations that spring from consumers and co-creation are likely to be better fit for consumer needs, right? Ultimately, how do you know what consumers want? Well, you ask him, right? And then the last reason is that sometimes co-creation can be relatively inexpensive and fast, particularly if you're using social media or websites, which is one of the things that Lego does, right? So doing the whole focus group and all that can be expensive and time a bit of a time suck. On the other hand, just putting something up on Facebook or a website or using social media is quick. Another benefit is that using co-creation is a method of strengthening the relationship between the consumer and the company, right? It makes it seem as though the company really cares about what the consumer wants or what the consumer needs. And then last but not least, consumers who are involved in the process of creating products tend to show a higher demand for them. They tend to want to buy the product or service more because they feel a sense of psychological ownership, right? Um, so it can be quite good, and you see more companies moving to this method. So I talked about Lay's, and I've talked about Legos, and even Starbucks is involved in co-creation. You can submit ideas to Starbucks about products or experiences and involvement, so on and so forth. I'd like you to take a minute to think of companies that you think are kind of excelling when it comes to co-creation. Things are not always easy when you create new products. Detroit has a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've seen them talk about the pushback that they get for their new products or new services. I have a guy, well, not I have, I know a guy who is creating a new hot sauce, and it has been problematic. Even though people seem to like the hot sauce, they're reluctant to buy the hot sauce, right? Why is that? You could have a lot of reasons, but one, people are inherently resistant to change, right? And to things that they are uncertain of. I'll give you a great example of this. I personally am not a huge fan of website changes, so the format of websites. This is actually a really big deal for me and drives me crazy. So resistance, a desire not to buy the innovation or use the innovation, so on and so forth, even in the face of pressure to do so. So retail resistance, marketing resistance. Marketers face a lot of resistance when you come out with new products, when you come out with new services. For a while, people didn't want to use Uber because, you don't know who the Uber driver is. It's kind of scary to be in a car with someone you don't know. And unfortunately, we've seen a few incidents where Uber drivers or Lyft drivers or whoever have behaved in inappropriate manners, and it have behaved in an inappropriate manner. And so this can be somewhat problematic. But hopefully, if it's a good product, and companies have been able to market the benefits and the value of the product, we do see some lessening of that resistance. So there are a few things that tend to be true when it comes to resistance, right? So one, people tend to get over their resistance when they figure out that the benefits of the product or service outweigh the cost or the negative effects, right? So, and that just makes sense. Why do you start using Uber or Lyft? Well, it's better for me because one, I don't have a car, but also it's just more convenient. Um, and so that outweighs kind of any negative effects, like being in a car where there's obviously cigarette smoke or having a somewhat shady looking Lyft driver. Research has shown consumers with low needs for change, as well as low need for cognition, which we talked about in a different class, are most likely to resist innovations. The opposite is true for people who are high needs for change or high need for cognition. They are least likely to resist innovation. I'll give you an example. I keep seeing people talk about driverless cars and how consumers don't want driverless cars. I cannot tell you how excited I am for the opportunity of driverless cars. Like, I'm so excited. Sign me up. First one on the list. So, Mick and Fournier, who are really big in the marketing literature, have come up with 8 central paradoxes of technological products. This paper was published in the Journal of Consumer Research. We've seen other papers published or other research that was published in this journal. So they just talk about things that are paradoxical. So for example, technology can facilitate regulation or order, but it can also lead to upheaval and or disorder, right? You can think of your own, right? So for example, technology is supposed to make things easier, but we know that there are instances where technology makes things more difficult. Technology is supposed to make things faster or more efficient, and yet we can probably all think of times when technology makes things significantly less efficient and takes significantly more time than it should, right? These again are paradoxes of technological products. Feel free to read the whole thing. So we've talked about innovations. We should also talk about a few other things. So a company can create a new innovative um, product or service or market offering, but consumers have to get it, right? Consumers have to be receptive to that product. They have to adopt it or not. So we'll talk about adoption and diffusion next. Adoption, the micro process concerned with the stages the consumer goes through in deciding to accept or reject a new product. I put these kind of little figures on here to think about this idea that people are different, right? People are different. And so when they're making the decision to accept or reject a new product, it's complicated, and it depends on who the consumer is, the company that is creating the product, and the product itself. And then diffusion, a macro process concerned with the spread of a new product from its source to the consuming public. So we'll talk about both of those and what they mean. When it comes to product adoption, right, actually adopting technology, some consumers go through what they call low effort when it comes to thinking about and kind of actually adopting the product. Low effort, it starts with awareness of the product. You have trial where they try the product, they form an attitude about the product, and then they adopt the product, right? And we can see this with continuous innovation, that this low effort is being made. When it comes to discontinuous information, right, like the internet, the Model T, so on and so forth, consumers are more likely to follow a high effort product adoption process. So they go through awareness, they search for information about the product, they form an attitude about the product, they try the product, and then they adopt the product. Why is the effort different? Why do you see more effort or high effort with discontinuous products, or discontinuous innovation, I should say? Because consumers don't really know much about the innovation. They must learn about it, and through learning about it, they usually form some kind of attitude. So we see that the hierarchy changes quite a bit when it comes to high effort versus low effort for product innovation. So when we think about stages in the adoption process, which I just talked about, awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, adoption, I kind of talked about the name of the stage, what happens during that stage, and then an example of each. Feel free to read this. I think you can read it. I put most of the information on the slide, so I personally won't go over it. We're looking at the stages in the adoption process, and there's something that I really want to point out when we talk about the last stage of the adoption process, and that is the fact that consumers can make the decision to adopt something and incorporate it into their lives, a service, an idea, any kind of market offering, or they can reject it, right? So they can say, this is not something I want, this is not something I want in my life, right? If we think about something like, I don't know, you buy yourself a bag of chips and it turns out you don't like those chips, and you say, I'll never buy those again. On the other hand, you could absolutely like something and decide, I'm going to buy that again. Or another thing that's not really mentioned here is that you can remain somewhat neutral. So for example, my last Amazon order, I placed this order for some really spicy ramen noodles because I tend to like a lot of spice. And these noodles are oh my God, they're so spicy and I love it so much. The only problem is that every time I eat them, I remember my mom saying, if you eat all of that hot stuff, you're gonna burn a hole right through your stomach. I don't think she's right, but she's like this little voice inside my head. And so I haven't decided if I'm going to adopt the noodles or reject them. So FYI, but that can happen. So there are different adopter groups, which I'm sure you've seen in other classes. The first are what they call innovators, a very small percentage of the population, people who are risk takers and also have the resources and desire to try new things, even if those things fail. The next group is what they call early adopters, about 13.5% of the population, who are selective about which technologies they start using. They are considered the ones that people check in with for new information and to reduce the uncertainty about new technology before adopting it, right? So other people look at early adopters to see whether or not they're going to actually adopt new technology. The early majority, about 34% of consumers, take their time before adopting a new idea. They are willing to embrace a new technology as long as they understand how it fits with their lives. Another 34% of the population are what they call the late majority. They adopt new innovations in reaction to peer pressure, emerging norms, or economic necessity. Um, the thing about people in the late majority, though, is that the uncertainty around the product itself should be resolved before they're willing to adopt the product. And then last but not least, what they call the laggards, people who make decisions based on past experience. They are usually economically unable to take risk on new ideas, right? So people who are laggards usually can't really afford um, to take risks. They don't have the resources to do so. So if you think of something like the VCR, once laggards figured out, hey, this actually works and it's great, they had to wait until the price came down to actually afford it. And this makes sense. Usually when new technology comes out, it becomes very expensive and decreases in price over time. So even people like the laggards who may have less disposable income can adopt the product. Of course, we can't identify these groups without asking, who are you? So who are you? Who would you call yourself, or how would you classify yourself? Are you a laggard? Are you an early adopter? Who are you? So if we go back to the product adoption curve and we try to think of ourselves, are we innovators who are usually, and these people are usually tech enthusiasts? Are we early adopters who are often called visionaries? Are we a part of the early majority, pragmatist? Are we conservatives, a part of the late majority? Or are we skeptics who are often associated with laggards? Um, and we think about a product like a veggie burger that bleeds. So now they've invented a burger that, or a meat product, or a meat similar product. I'm not sure what a meat alternative, I guess. Veggie burger that looks like the one you see here, but it bleeds. So you can get this burger rare or medium rare or something like this. When it comes to a product like this, how willing are you to try it? Would you consider yourself to be a person who's an innovator? Would you wait and be a laggard? Who are you? So we talked about chirps in another class. Chips that are made out of cricket flour, 20 grams of protein per bag. 20 grams of protein. That's kind of big when you think about how much protein the average chip has. But again, the question becomes, who are you? Are you a person who's willing to have cricket flour chips? Where would you fall on the product adoption curve? So ESPN is coming out with its own network, or they're reported to be coming out with their own network. I saw something the other day that said that ESPN lost about 1 million consumers or subscriptions, excuse me, in the last 2 years or so, as people cut the cord on cable. So doing something like creating your own network channel or your own kind of channel that people can subscribe to even without cable seems to make sense. The question, of course, is how much ESPN is going to charge for this channel. And again, the question becomes for you, if we're talking about ESPN Plus, where are you on the product adoption curve? Would you be late majority, early majority, an early adopter? And then, of course, thinking to yourself, what would you be if the price was $5 versus 20, right? We could argue, and I think successfully argue, that ESPN has some fairly premium content, and so they can charge a little bit more than other solo channels. So something to think about. So I'll be honest. and say that I don't really get this product. I don't really understand it, but I also don't, I'm not a selfie person or anything like this. So that probably kind of is one of the reasons I don't get this product. But anyway, Google has come out with this product that you can clip on your body. It takes pictures and short videos. You can clip it anywhere you like, and it learns over time what to take pictures of. So it'll take pictures of smiles, movements, familiar faces. It can recognize your face, or I'm sorry, your pet. Um, and you don't need an internet connection or a phone for it to work. So basically you clip it on, and anytime you kind of are moving around, or you kind of have, a great expression on your face. I'm assuming you're not clipping it on your body so it can see the expression on your face. I don't exactly know how this works, but the question, of course, would be, where are you on the product adoption curve? Honestly, I couldn't be anything more than a late majority, if not a laggard, when it comes to this product. Again, I don't take a lot of pictures, don't really care for them, so kind of interesting. So I always love to look for factual evidence or statistics around kind of whatever I'm talking about for whatever class I'm teaching. What they find is that younger men, higher income adults tend to be early technology adopters. And this makes sense. In terms of higher income people can usually take more risk. So if you look at the breakdown of what that means, people who have a strong preference for new technology tend to be younger, right? 65 plus tend to have a lower percentage of consumers who have a strong preference for new technology. What's really interesting, though, really interesting if you're looking at these figures, is that there's not much difference between the ages of 18 and 64 in terms of strong preference for new technology. I would have bet or imagine that if I had polled you before I showed you these numbers, you would have said that 18 to 29 would show a higher preference for new technology than 50 to 64, but we don't see that. When we look at gender, we see a difference between men and women. 30% of men have a strong preference for new technology, but 26% with women. But I read a study not too long ago that said when you ask women what they want, you see this shift from women who are asking for jewelry as presents to women who are asking for technology. So I wonder, if you were to retake this, it's 2014, if you'd see a difference in kind of gender right now. Age and gender. When we look at men who are 18 to 49, they show a much stronger preference for new technology than men who are 50 and women who are 50 plus, I should say. Men who are 50 plus and women who are 50 plus. You also see a huge difference between people who are families who make more than $150,000, right? Strong preference for new technology versus consumers who make less than 150. When we look at the big five, which we talked about, I believe, last class, you also see differences. People who are open to experiences, open to experience, show a much higher preference for new technology. People who are extroverted tend to show a higher difference, or a higher desire for new technology. But when you look at the others, emotional stability, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability is another term for neuroticism. I should say that up front. You see that they're about similar. So, yeah, good information to know.